Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Rother District Council Planning Committee. The first item on the agenda are the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of June. Copies have been circulated. Do I have your authority to sign, please? Thank you. The second item are apologies for absence and substitutes.
Apologies received from Mrs. M.L. Barnes and Councillor J. Barnes is here as substitute.
Thank you. And are there any additional agenda items?
No, there are none, Chair.
Are there any withdrawn applications? No. Disclosures of interest. To receive any disclosure by members of personal and disclosable pecuniary interests in matters on the agenda, the nature of any interest and whether the member regards the personal interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Members are reminded of the need to repeat their declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor John Barnes.
I think just for the sake of transparency, I obviously will have come across the chairman of Westfield Parish Council in connection with Rauch, since I am chairman of Etchingham Parish Council. But I regard that as very distant and personal, not prejudicial.
Accepted, thank you. Councillor Beverley Cooper is appearing remotely. Do you have an interest to declare?
Yeah, I'd just like to declare that I'm a Westfield Parish Councillor appointed in May 2023.
And that is just a personal interest? A purely personal interest?
Well, it relates to an item that's on the agenda today.
But personal and not prejudicial. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more? No further declarations of interest. Thank you very much. Do we agree the planning applications index? Don't see any reason why not to. Yes, agreed. So the first substantive item on the agenda is reference RR 2022-2570P, and this is an application relating to numbers 41A, 41 and 43 Barnhorn Road, Bexhill. And our officer, Asma, if I first find my page. There. And I call on Asma Chowdhury to present the application to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor. I shall share my screen and have the slides ready. Is it visible? Yes. Right. This application site is located on the south side of Barnhorn Road, consisting of 3 adjoining residential properties. It is proposed to demolish these dwellings and redevelop the site to provide a 2 to 3 storey retirement living apartment comprising 35 units, a mix of 1 and 2 beds. The development includes parking, landscaping, refuse store, mobility scooter store and substation. In terms of the detailed design of the apartment, having regard to the wider street scene, which is varied in scale, shape, form, height, material finish, the frontage of the apartment, in the way that it has been designed, reflects the individual domestic proportions and features exhibited in the wider street scene. Sorry, there's a delay with the slides there. It is no doubt a large development, but its scale to the rear, as its scale is to the rear aspect of the apartment would not be prominent in the Barnhorn Road street scene. In terms of visual impact from Spindlewood Drive, the apartment, so there's Spindlewood Drive, the next slide will come up, there's Spindlewood Drive there at the back, so there will be some visibility from Spindlewood Drive in the skyline above the dwellings. You would have seen from our site visit that the rooftops of the existing dwellings are visible. This is Spindlewood Drive, and the proposed retirement living apartment would be partially visible above the skyline in this sort of direction behind the trees there. However, with the combination of the distance between the rear of the application site and Spindlewood Drive and the small area of woodland in between, which would provide some visual obstruction in the Spindlewood Drive street scene, the visual impact of the development would appear recessive and in the backdrop. In terms of neighbour amenity, you have number 39, if I can get to the right slide, that one there. So you have number 39 to the east. The apartment would be positioned slightly closer by 1 metre, but it retains a gap of 6.4 metres, which can be construed as a fairly wide gap, not dissimilar to the relationship distance between dwellings in the wider street scene, which I should note is varied, with some building relationships having smaller gaps in between. As the development projects rearward, the footprint of the apartment steps in quite significantly, as you can see here. So you have a step in there, and then as it projects rearward, it steps in further. So this widens the gap from the side of the apartment and the boundary with number 39. As the development projects rearwards, any overlooking distance from the side windows and balconies increases. Whilst there may be some outlook across the garden onto number 39, given the viewing distance in excess of 20 metres, the impact is not considered to be significantly harmful. And the overlooking would be mitigated by supplemental planting required by condition. On the other side, you have number 45. The arrangement is not dissimilar to that with number 39 in terms of the building relationship. As you will recall from our recent site visit, there is significantly more substantive screening vegetation along this boundary here, which helps provide some pretty good screening. Same again with neighbours amenity to the rear, wall to wall. The nearest wall to wall distance is a little over 20 metres, and you have this area of woodland, which also provides some screening. And the first floor windows here will also be obscure glazed. So altogether, impact to neighbours' amenity for the properties at Spindlewood Drive would be mitigated. In terms of access and parking, this has obviously been an issue of concern for local residents and members. The access serving numbers 41A and 43 will be closed and stopped up with boundary hedging. The access for number 41 would be retained and widened to allow for two-way vehicular movement. Amended plans have been received showing that two-way movement can be achieved, which National Highways have now confirmed to be acceptable. National Highways have recommended a series of conditions which is included in the committee report and have required an additional condition for stopping up the existing accesses serving 41 and 43. The plans list is also amended, that is the condition, to include the additional access plan showing the tracking. In terms of parking, clearly there is an under provision. The County Council's parking calculator, which provides the standard for the minimum, requires 21 spaces, but only 14 is proposed. As with any application, each application must be considered on its own merits. So regard is had to the nature of the development and its location. In this case, according to Google, the walking distance from the site to Tesco's in Little Common is approximately 7 minutes, maybe 10 to 12 minutes for older residents, but even that is a reasonable walking distance. Bus stops are even closer, being within a couple of minutes. This is considered alongside the nature of the development. The proposal is for a retirement living apartment, and the age restriction of the occupants would be over 55. Notwithstanding this age restriction, the applicant's submission indicates that the average age of purchasers of their apartment are in their late 70s, and that as they are scaling down into retirement living, there is also a tendency to give up the car. Provision is also provided for mobility scooter storage, providing space for 5 scooters. Combined with the 14 parking spaces, that totals to 19. This provides range and improves the options for residents who may wish to not rely on the car if there are other modes of transport available to them. It should be noted that this kind of development with reduced parking options tends to be self-regulating. Purchasers would make informed choices, understanding the limited parking options available on site and the little parking available on the surrounding roads, and deciding whether this development would be suitable for their needs without a car. As discussed with members, an additional condition is recommended for a parking management plan to ensure parking does not spill out onto the adjacent and nearby roads. Overall, given the proximity to buses, providing services to Bexhill and Eastbourne with onward connections to other transport options, and access to a wide range of services and amenities, etc., and given the specific nature of the development being for older, elderly residents, the low parking provision is considered to be acceptable in this case. Moving on to viability. This application seeks not to provide any affordable housing, nor make any off-site contribution for affordable housing. The applicants have provided a viability appraisal, setting out that any affordable housing provision or contribution would render the development unviable. The Council has undertaken its own independent review of the applicant's viability appraisal using ET Planning, who have arrived at a different conclusion. They agree that the developer cannot viably provide affordable housing, but that they can make a contribution of over £63,000. This figure has been disputed between the parties, but ET Planning, the Council's appraiser, remain firm in their conclusion. On the basis of their final report, which defends their position, it is considered that the developer can make this contribution. That said, the applicants maintain their position that the development cannot produce any off-site contribution sum. Therefore, members are requested to consider whether the Council should forego the sum of £63,000 plus. That means considering the planning balance. That includes, in weighing up the planning balance, the Council's evidence base recognises a deficit for older people housing. This has significant weight. As set out in the Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment, known as the HEDNA, Rother has a high proportion of older people compared to the national average, and a particularly high proportion of people aged 65 to 74, and that the older population is set to increase. The HEDNA also recognises a significant need for rental housing, with support for affordable housing for older people. This also has weight. The Council also does not have a 5-year housing land supply, being only able to deliver 2.79 years. This also has significant weight. However, refusing this application on the basis that no affordable housing is provided does not improve the council's housing land supply figure, in that we would also lose out on much needed open market older people housing. On this basis, engage in the national planning policy framework, which requires a presumption in favour of sustainable development. It is considered that the loss of affordable housing contribution is outweighed by the benefits of contributing 35 dwellings to Rother's 5-year housing land supply. Members are therefore recommended to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any councillor have any questions? Councillor Stanger.
Yeah, thank you, Asma. Just two queries, really. Still objections from the Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Board and the, what was the other one? There was East Sussex Water Management, Flood Risk Management. Is that a change, the objections, or they're still objecting? Oh, it's still on the report then, so I'm just reading it. Yeah. Oh, is this on the 6.3 and 6.5 is still listed as objection?
I think the answer might be that the objection was rather overtaken by the later comments.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah. So, sorry, just to say that whilst there were initial concerns, don't have the report up in front of me, those concerns have been addressed and subject to conditions.
Any other councillor wishes to answer a question? Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Can I just double check on page 25, paragraph 870? Did you say that National Highways have now rejected? They have withdrawn it. Thank you.
They have withdrawn their objections and recommended a series of conditions with one additional condition, which is the closure of a couple of the access points.
I thought you said that, but thank you.
And have any further conditions been agreed with the applicant beyond what we knew when we went to the site visit on Tuesday?
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Yes. Have any further conditions been agreed with the applicant since Tuesday when we visited the site?
I haven't had confirmation. I believe the agent is amongst us and Mr. Thomas can confirm, but Mr. Thomas has been sent the condition for age restriction and for the parking management plan, as well as the additional list of conditions from National Highways and an amendment to the plans list. So Mr. Thomas can confirm that for you.
Thank you. Yes, we'll hear. I don't think there are any further questions from councillors. So we'll hear from Mr. Zayed Thomas then, please, for Planning Issues Limited, the agent. If you come forward to the desk, you probably know the score from other councils. You have to press the button on the microphone, the red light comes on, and you have exactly 5 minutes and no more. After that, members may ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is for a high-quality scheme of 35 retirement living apartments. The site is a site assembly comprising of 3 residential properties, number 41A, 41 and 43 Barnhorn Road. The site is located in an area well served by public transport, with 2 bus stops within 100 metres of the site. Residents will also be within walking distance of the shops and facilities at the Little Common Local Centre, which is approximately 300 metres to the east of the site. This is a site which is ideally suited to retirement living housing and will bring numerous benefits to both the local area and the wider district. The government identifies the delivery of older persons housing as critical and the National Planning Practice Guidance advises local authorities to take a positive approach to proposals such as this, where there is an unmet need. The Housing and Economic Needs Assessment prepared for the emerging local plan shows that Rother has a much higher proportion of people aged over 65, 38.2% of the total population, compared to the national average, which is 18.2%. The demographic projections show an increase in the population aged 65 and over of 52% by 2039. To meet the needs of the ageing population, an additional 2,920 older persons housing units are required over this period. Another housing benefit derived from the proposal would be that as most residents of retirement living apartments downsize from homes in the local area, in many instances this frees up a family home that is currently being underoccupied. Saliently, the proposal would assist in addressing the district's shortfall in housing land supply and delivery, and as such the presumption in favour of sustainable development is in effect. Significant weight should be given to the delivery of housing in the planning balance. A T-shaped building is proposed, with the principal elevation fronting Barnhorn Road, with a car park providing 14 spaces to the north of the site and a south-facing communal residence garden to the rear. The proposal is 2 storeys in height on the front. Barnhorn Road elevation provides an additional level of accommodation to the rear by making use of the falling gradient and placing additional units in the roof. In response to the surrounding context and character of the site, the building has been designed to appear like 3 domestic properties from the Barnhorn Road frontage. Each of the 3 components that comprise the frontage has been designed to appear visually distinct through the use of varied projections, bay roofs and gables. The 3 components are split by a recessed link, which uses light grey feature weatherboarding so as to appear subservient. The proposal has been designed to ensure that there are no negative impacts on the amenity of the surrounding properties. The officer's report provides a thorough assessment of this matter and concludes that the building has been set back and windows duly orientated in a manner that would result in no significant impact on the amenity of neighbours. Vehicular access into the site is taken via Barnhorn Road, utilising one of the existing accesses, with the other 2 accesses to be stopped up. The applicant has responded to feedback from National Highways by widening the access to allow 2-way vehicle movements as requested. Further to the submission of vehicle tracking drawings, National Highways have withdrawn their objection. The ratio of parking provided on site is 0.4 spaces per unit and exceeds the level of demand in a typical Churchill retirement level living development, which is 0.28 spaces per unit. Residents of retirement living housing are typically 81 and moves that they are closer to local services and so can give up their cars. The applicant has submitted a substantial body of evidence to the council to support this and, when required, has successfully defended their level of parking provision at appeal. Moreover, it is not in a developer's interest to provide a development with insufficient levels of parking, as it would deter purchasers and upset residents. The Highway Authority has reviewed the evidence submitted and agreed that the proposal will not have an adverse impact on the local highway network and that the proposed level of parking is acceptable. In respect of affordable housing conditions, an independent review of the financial viability appraisal was undertaken on behalf of the Council. This asserts that an affordable housing contribution of £63,000 was viable. However, this conclusion was based on several erroneous assumptions which contrast sharply from established best practice. It is not, therefore, the company's view that the conclusion of the independent viability review would withstand scrutiny at appeal and that they could not agree with its conclusions on that basis. While we note that the committee report... 30 seconds. While we note that the committee report supports the conclusions of independent viability review, the extent of housing need is such in the district that, on balance, a nil affordable housing contribution could be accepted. While this is accepted, this may be disappointing to members. The proposal would generate the provision of a SIL contribution of circa £190,000 and a new homes bonus of circa £240,000. And finally, I'd like to confirm that the applicant is willing to accept the additional conditions as proposed. Thank you very much for your opportunity.
Thank you very much. 4 seconds over. Very, very well done. Thank you. Now, the next part in the proceedings is for members to ask you questions, and I see that we have one from Councillor Drayson and then Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Just 2 on. One is on the parking, and I accept that Churchill know its business, and obviously there's the 14 spaces. Has any consideration been given to allocating those spaces to specific flats, so that one is sold with a car parking space? Then there's a second one. And then the second one is, and I realise it possibly should have been at the officer, but in our report it talks about providing requiring charging points for electric bikes. Given that older people aren't always too old to drive a car, is there any consideration for electric vehicle charging points?
So in the first instance, it's my understanding that parking spaces are not allocated and that they are communally provided for all residents on that basis. The second aspect of it is that I believe in terms of, it may be in terms of the building regulations, that, but certainly in terms of the applicant, that a number of car charging, electric vehicle charging spaces are provided, and that all car parking spaces are enabled to accommodate electrical vehicle charging at a further point, i.e. the wiring is there, and that at a later date a charging point can be put on later on.
Thank you.
Yes, regarding the parking, you've accepted a condition as to the parking. Perhaps it would help councillors if you read out the words of the proposed condition, so that we know what we're talking about. Does anyone have it?
I do. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Right, the parking condition is the The residential aspect of the proposal shall not be occupied until a parking management plan has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The parking management plan shall contain details of how the parking spaces will be managed, how the residents and their visitors will be deterred from parking on the street is to be managed. The parking management plan shall be implemented in accordance with the approved details prior to the first occupation of the residential unit and shall thereafter be retained. And the reason for the condition is to ensure that the limited on-site parking is adequately managed on-site in order to safeguard the safe operations of the public highway in accordance with policy.
Thank you very much indeed, and we take that into account, and your comments about your experience as a developer of sites such as this one. There was a reference to electric charging points. I think there are provisions for electric buggies. Are there? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so there is a mobility scooter store provided on the site. It provides storage and charging facilities for electric mobility scooters that's made commonly available for residents.
Thank you. And Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Just a quick question on staff and carers. There's very few parking spots, and there must be, you've got an office, I take it, in the building. So there must be a few staff, and obviously at some point you get carers coming in that need to stop to look after some of the residents, perhaps. So I'm worried about sort of parking nuisance around the local area, possibly, that will sort of park up around the corner and sort of annoy some of the local residents around that live around that area. That's my sort of only problem, really.
In terms of members of staff, there's one member of staff that's on the site 9 to 5 on the weekdays, and that's the lodge manager who effectively looks after the maintenance of the building and the gardens, and effectively fields day-to-day queries and tries to facilitate a sense of community amongst the residents. So they would be the only full-time member of staff, and depending on that, they're usually discouraged from parking on the site, either by taking public transportation or so on. But they tend to be based in the local area. It's a local job. It's not taken from someone parachuted in from somewhere else. In respect of carers, there's no dedicated on-site care provided on site. It's not a C2 care home facility. But I take your point that as some residents get more frail, they may require visitation by healthcare specialists. I think what usually happens is with these types of developments is that residents, or some of the residents, move in with a car, and then become increasingly frail and then give up their car. So we find that the residents who move in with a car, as a development matures, car ownership falls further as the development gets older, and so that there is adequate provision for kind of visitation on the site as well. So that would defer kind of any on-street nuisance parking.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Councillor John Barnes and then Councillor Gray.
Yes, I'm not sure who the lodge manager or whatever his designation is, who will be employing him. Presumably one of the car parking spaces may be required for him. I'd really like to explore how you settle on the figure of 14, or whether this is simply the constraints imposed by an otherwise admirable design. Because this is less than one pitch per household. I could understand not going as high as 21, but is 14 an arbitrary figure, or is it one that you built into your plans?
Thank you. 14 is one which we build into our plans in terms of early on. So Churchill Retirement Living have quite circa close to 30 years' experience in terms of delivering these forms of accommodation, and retain a long-standing interest in them as they have a management company, and so therefore any issues with these developments come forward in the long run. They would have to tackle any issues in terms of parking or shortfalls of parking as time goes on. So they've undertaken quite significant survey work and monitor the level of parking, and it is their experience that they provide that the parking requirement is 0.28 parking spaces per unit, so circa just under 1 for 3. At this development, they're providing just about 1 for 4 parking spaces. So it is by design. It's in terms of their research and their ongoing kind of management commitment to these forms of development.
Supplementary, Chairman. Presumably, if you were the management company, you could require the lodge manager to access by public transport and not use a parking space as part of the contract.
That's correct. I think as a the management company, and I'm not in HR. I'm not kind of involved in the hiring practices, but I do know that parking on site is discouraged for lodge managers. That it's in terms of kind of environmental credentials and so on and so forth, and the locations of the site, close to public transport and in existing urban areas, that they're discouraged from parking on site.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, can you tell us anything about the actual materials that are being used for the buildings? Are they sustainable? Do you have any solar panels? What kind of heating will it be?
So I think in terms of sustainability, it will be built to the Future Homes interim standards, which I think is 2025. So that's that zero carbon ready is my understanding. So there's quite a lot of emphasis in terms of sustainability as per as is law under the building regulations. The building materials proposed on the frontage are red brick and painted white brick. With kind of light grey weatherboarding to the rear and kind of roof kind of brown clay effect roof tiles to for the roof. I think in terms of meeting the Future Home standard, that you have to put quite a lot of emphasis on thermal efficiency and kind of building so that the buildings retain as much heat as possible. I do know that an element of on-site renewable is required in order to meet the regulations. That differs from scheme to scheme. It tends to be photovoltaics on the roof in the vast majority of cases, unless it's not feasible for a design or practical reason. I can't see anything that would prevent photovoltaics on this roof, but in the event it wasn't feasible, then it would probably move to something along the lines of some kind of air or ground source heat pump. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we know if any photovoltaic panels are proposed on the development?
The roof plan appears to indicate photovoltaic on the flat roof.
Thank you very much. I hope that answered the question. Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, thank you. I went on the site visit a couple of days ago, and my original worries were around car parking, and to a certain extent, those fears have been allayed. But one thing that's still outstanding in my mind is the boundary between 39 and 41, or that. So the other boundaries, as we went into the other gardens, had quite a lot of mature planting and trees, whereas on that boundary between 39 and 41 didn't. And so when we were down the garden, where sort of at the edge of where you would be building the sort of, if you like, the bottom of the T, it was very clear you could see into, you could see the back windows of number 39, and one assumes if it's going to be 3 stories that there'd be quite a bit of overlooking. Now, I note that the other conditions you've accepted, and there is obviously some conditions around planting. Can you sort of assure me that you will pay particular attention to plant on that, plant sufficient screening on that boundary to help with privacy?
So I do believe that the scheme was submitted with a high-level landscaping plan, and I think that does show it's gardens in that area, in that corner. In fact, if it's the whole rear of the site is garden land, south-facing gardens, and it would make sense to plant. And there certainly would be capacity to plant in that corner, particularly in terms of screening and neighbour rejection, neighbour amenity. I do think, as Asma may be able to assist me in this, that the landscaping scheme does show some planting in that corner. I don't have the plans in front of me, but I do recall planting in that corner. But either way, that landscaping scheme would need to be finalised and specified, I believe, by condition, and there would be final approval from the local authority, and so a note or an informative could be added, effectively requiring additional planting in that corner.
Yes, I think it's proposed condition 15, isn't it? That yes, that there is to be a planting landscaping plan. Yes. Councillor Byrne, are you indicating? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the vexed question, maybe not a vexed question, of electric vehicle charging points. You said, if I heard you correctly, the wiring will be laid into each of the parking spaces. Now, I wonder why, if the wiring is there, you're not putting in the actual charging points. So is it the company's intention at a later date to bear the cost of putting those in?
So I can't. I think it's purely to do with demand at this point in terms of the charging points, and also, candidly, the charging point technology is changing quite significantly and quite quickly. So a number of charging points that have been put in the last three years or so are already kind of obsolete. It's a very fast moving sector. So and in terms of earlier kind of issues and concerns in kind of ongoing deal with it. I do know that has been raised as a concern that effectively it's a fast-paced technology, it's a fast-paced sector, and it becomes obsolete quickly. So I believe that there's a practical reason for not making it 100% electric charging. Also, currently, while there's very marked shift towards electric vehicles, not everyone has an electric vehicle at this point in time. So I believe that the ducting is there to facilitate a transition to economic vehicles in the kind of medium to long term, and that short term we're not providing 100% charging points, mainly due to demand, probably due to cost saving, and also candidly because of the fast moving obsolescence issue.
Sorry, can I just say something there? I think this council would understand the difficulties of providing electric charging points. We've had enormous trouble ourselves trying to install them in our own car parks, and we've been quite unable to do it in Rye at all due to the lack of suitable electric supply. But yes, you have something else to say.
That's to the nub of my question, really. The ratio that you've quoted in Churchill's previous experience, the ratio of residents to car parking spaces, and it's that previous experience that you're using to justify the number of parking spaces, the ratio of parking spaces to residents in this development. However, as Chairman has just said, once you start saying this car has to be in this space for this length of time, that equation changes markedly. And I'm worried that if there are more electric vehicles, then you're going to be increasingly under capacity in terms of charging in the future. When you said you're putting in ducting, is that all? You're not putting in cabling, but you are putting in ducting, and you are going to, and Churchill are going to bear the cost on a demand basis, as and when?
You'll have to forgive me in terms of the technical specifications of it. I try and stay as kind of up to date on it as possible, but I'm not. It's outside my area of expertise. My understanding is, and I won't attempt to use any terminology, is that the spaces are made to be easily converted to accommodate the charging point at a future date, whether that is ducting or cabling or some other mechanism. So the vehicle chargings are enabled. The vehicle charging can be put on at a later date. In terms of the management of car parking spaces and the need for it, there is a on-site manager who facilitates an element of community. That's a salient an important part of the offer, as it were, and that there would be a kind of acknowledgement that or attempts to speak with residents over ensuring that those who have electric cars are able to access parking adequately. I believe when the demand it kind of is required for the additional charging points, then they can be added. Again, it will come through Churchill. It will be facilitated through the management of the lodge manager, and then it could be brought forward quickly. In terms of who pays for it, I'm not entirely sure. I think that there is provision made in terms of the service charge for maintenance or repairs or kind of changes to the development, and it could potentially come out of that pot of monies. However, I obviously can't guarantee that.
Thank you. I imagine that when the council and the applicant consider the parking management plan, any sort of restrictions on parking in particular places caused by electric charging points could be considered. I don't think that sort of answers the problem, but they could be considered in devising the management plan. Would that be right?
There is a condition in the report for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, so those details would be required prior to the occupation of any of the dwelling units. So there is an expectation that electric vehicle charging infrastructure is provided on site. It need not be 100%, that would be unreasonable. Not everyone has an electric car, but some infrastructure should be made available.
Well, thank you. It's there. Councillor Groner.
Thank you. What percentage of the units do you anticipate will be sold to people in the immediate vicinity, based on 30 years of experience for Churchill?
I can't give you an exact percentage. I believe it is the overwhelming majority, far more than 50%. That's what I recall. I do believe survey data has been undertaken on that, and indeed for this type of housing nationally, not just for Churchill retirement living. That I believe that it's been acknowledged and accepted that the number of people who move into them are typically from the locality. So I will apologise for not having a specific figure, and I will say it's the majority. It's over 50%.
It's over 50. So there's still a significant amount of people coming from outside of the area, retiring, maybe down to the coast, and using probably a lot of the facilities that older people sometimes need in terms of health.
I don't believe it can be discounted completely. However, I think it depends on the location. So I think Little Common, I appreciate that Bexhill is a seaside town, and they are typically tend to have retirees move into them. Little Common is further away from the coast, so I would anticipate in terms of people moving from the surrounding area, it would be from outside. Sorry, the local area, it would be lower as a result.
Okay, thank you. Just one further question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. What is the average cost or price at sale of a two-bedroom flat?
I don't know that we have any control over that, Councillor Groner.
No, it's a point of interest in relating to £63,000 contribution to affordable housing. So I think if we accept that there's a need for market housing,
I don't think we can open up those calculations which have been done by experts following their proper knowledge and the necessary formulae.
It's not the calculation; it's the ability to pay. That's it. That's all.
We know that there's a disagreement, and the officer has invited us to consider the potential loss of the 60,000 or whatever against the other benefits of the scheme, and that's where we are. But we know there's a dispute on whether the money should be charged or not, but we have to weigh it against the other advantages and bear in mind all the things the officer has said. I don't think we can go into the exact selling prices of individual flats.
I mean, I am happy to answer questions on the viability. I am happy to.
Maybe I should rephrase it. I'm just trying to understand why it's not perceived as being viable when there's that many units and it's significant cost. That's really what I was trying to understand.
A very brief answer then.
Okay, thank you. And I have to be careful here because I'm also by trade a chartered surveyor, and the independent viability. Although I didn't do the viability review for this, but it has been independently looked at by another firm who undertaking the viability. The difficulties in this is that, generally speaking, there's elements of interpretation in undertaking a viability assessment. And these can be on things like sales values, build costs, and there's disagreement between parties on that. When you put those to one side and the disagreement, you also have matters that are more fundamental, that we consider to be methodological errors. Now, in this instance, it is our view, and it is my view, that there have been some errors that appear to be, or I consider to be, methodological, and that taking those errors into consideration, the sum of money would become non-viable on that basis. You know, the £63,000 would be accommodated, would be lost through that error of methodology. I take the point, and I can see why the council would not want to, or kind of enter into a dispute on methodology, particularly as this is a litigious field. And so, the council has put its position, and the applicant has put his position in terms of viability. It is our view that it is a fundamental methodological issue that is generating the £63,000, not a point of interpretation or point of professional opinion.
I don't know. I think it might be fair to say that although there is a dispute over that amount, there is substantial agreement on the fact that affordable housing can't be provided on this site.
Affordable housing can't be provided on the site. That's been agreed.
This is just a relatively small part of that as a payment in lieu of a part amount. I think that's as far as we can take that particular thing. Now, I think we're getting towards the end of questions. Councillor Creaser, did you indicate earlier? And did I miss you?
Yes, I did, and I asked you to write it down. Never mind. In terms of future-proofing this development, I mean, obviously, if it's 55 and upwards, that's 15 years those people could potentially still be in employment and maybe not employed just around the corner, might not working from home. So then you have also potential requirements for that. And then when you get to 70, you then have the issues of age-related physical difficulties. And one of the things that I've noticed, because obviously this isn't close to any of the regular hospitals. So if you've got A&E issues, someone has a fall or whatever else, and they need continuing help, the trend at the moment, and possibly going forward, is to give people the opportunity to have virtual ward situations, which basically you have the technology indoors and everybody that needs to monitor you.
Do I hear a question coming?
Hang on a minute. The thing of it is that could be up to... Just let me finish, please. That could be 4 times a day having care workers having to come. So if you've got more than one person with something like that, and you've only got 14 spaces, and potentially quite a few of the residents are working and have cars and things, I'm still a bit concerned that we haven't really future-proofed the parking provision. I think, and as you said yourself, the spaces are 1 space to approximately 3 point something or other of residents, but you're saying this is 4 to 1, and yet you have quite a young provision in terms of people 55 and over.
What's the question?
So my question is, do you consider that to be sufficient? Because I don't know, I'm not sure.
In terms of the age, so the 55 age group tends to be for somebody with is a spouse. Effectively, it's a limit to or minimum age for a spouse to live in, with the one of the residents being over 65.
Gotcha. Okay.
So in terms of people aged over 55, it is infrequent, I'd say. In terms of the average, and I'm not saying that people 65 don't move into the properties. That age condition is there for a reason, but typically the type of accommodation is very much geared towards a certain type of lifestyle. So the lifestyle is that you maybe have a larger home, or you have a car, or you and you are no longer able to maintain or wish to continue bearing the costs of maintaining that property and that vehicle and so on and so forth. It becomes more of a burden. And so you move into a smaller kind of better located facility or home, which is what's offered, and that is what skews the age far more towards I think it's 79 or 78 or 79 upon entry, and then generally as a development matures, it becomes to like 82. As in it's been open for a number of years. So while that age condition is there, and the capability of people who are 65 to move in, it's overwhelmingly not taken up by people in that age range. Conversely, as well, looking at the opposite side of things, the development is built to M42 accessibility standards, which is generally where it's basically age appropriate, that you're able to. It's more in tune to allow people to age better, to stay relevant, to not result in accidents, and for people to have who have short-term mobility issues, not long-term wheelchair use, but short-term mobility issues, in order to be accommodated there. So the apartments are designed and by their definition and technically in order to accommodate kind of aging and to avoid the pitfalls of aging that are typically in unsuitable housing, your trips, your falls, and so on and so forth. So there's evidence that suggests that it reduces your trips and falls and it lowers the impact on nearby hospitals. I believe I answered it, so I won't dwell on it in terms of when carers come in. It's typically when the development has matured, that there's a greater proportion of older, frailer people in there, and as such, the level of car ownership falls dramatically when that level of frailty increases, because people drive less and less, and they don't want the burden and the cost associated with running a vehicle, particularly if they're using it very sparsely, and they're not going out as much if they're very frail. And so that frees up car parking space in the area to accommodate those care workers. I think I've tackled all the points. Is that okay?
I think you really have, and I think we're come to the end of questions there. Are you, Councillor Gordon? Do you really want to ask a question?
No, I don't actually. Councillor Gordon's moving on, proposing, possibly. Oh.
Well,
you can second it then.
Well, first of all, I think we have to say thank you very much for your help. If you go back to the gallery, that's been very, very useful indeed. Thank you. And yes, we have perhaps substantially covered the points. So you are proposing.
I'm proposing we grant.
Proposing to grant in accordance with the officer's recommendation and with the additional conditions.
Yes.
And seconded by Councillor Drayson.
Yes, that's correct.
Does any councillor wish to speak, or should we move to a vote? Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I can see exactly why it's being proposed, and I suspect in the end I'm going to come down that way. But I really feel we ought to express some concern back to the developer about the future-proofing of this site in parking terms. The assumption that we're going to go on with the current pattern of when frailty comes in, given the technological advantages, the technical advances that the NHS is accomplishing. This is very much, I think, present provision. And one of my slight worries about the layout on the site, which is otherwise, I think, extremely imaginative, well designed, actually, to avoid impinging on neighbours. In other words, I think this is an excellent facility. It's going to meet real needs, but the way it's been designed leaves very limited room if the parking proves a problem. Normally, in a way, you wouldn't worry about that because on-street parking would be a possibility. Here, because this is currently the major thoroughfare west out of Bexhill, there is an almost continual flow of traffic, and anything that actually impinges on that flow of traffic is going to be deeply undesirable. There are already traffic jams at various stages of the day, and I have, in the past, spent something like 40 minutes covering 2 or 3 miles there. So I think I am genuinely worried about the lack of future-proofing should the parking assumptions prove wrong. I don't think that's probably enough to cause a refusal, but I do think we need to add a rider to the motion to say that we have concerns about the provision of parking and the lack of flexibility in expanding it if necessary. And I think that with that reservation, I probably would be minded to vote for it.
I mean, I think the problem there is if we grant permission on the terms set out, then we have granted permission on the terms set out. There's not really, this is perhaps partly your point, there is no obvious way of expanding the parking on that site. There's nothing that the developer can take away from this meeting that would make any difference.
There is very limited possibility. I've just been looking again at the design. I could see how you could get another couple of spaces, but because of the way the frontage occupies the whole thing, the chances of doing more than that, I think, are very limited, and that is a worry.
Well, perhaps we could just informally ask Mr. Thomas to take that away rather than to incorporate it in the formal decision. But he is nodding that he will take that away with him. Yes, Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Chair. This is really a matter of clarification. We seem to be talking about the desirability and the saleability of the scheme, which is not our concern, really. If Churchill find that it's more difficult to sell the units in the future because of the amount of parking, I don't see that this reflects on the council or reflects on the traffic. I don't think we should seek to solve Churchill's problem with the evolving ratio of residents to car parks and whether you dedicate an EV charging point or not. I don't see how this is our business. I merely see it as a business case for Churchill, which they put before us, and I'm not unhappy with it.
Saleability is not a matter for us. May I just finish? Saleability is not a matter for us, but if there is inadequate parking and it impinges on the highway and so on, then that would be. But unfortunately, it's not neither fortunate nor unfortunate. Neither the Highways Agency nor the County Council actually have any objections to this on those grounds.
But we're approving a certain number of parking spaces. Whether they're adequate for the scheme or not, we are only approving that number of spaces. So we can't say, what if Churchill want to double it for some reason, because they can't within the scheme that we're granting.
No doubt officers would advise at some stage in the future, if this ever became a problem, as to whether it required the matter to come back here for a variation of conditions or whatever. But we're not there. We're here where we are today. Councillor Barnes.
I really must correct Councillor Byrne. He's putting a totally false interpretation on my words. My concern is not about Churchill's saleability. It is about the possible impact on traffic patterns which are critical to Bexhill. Were there a bypass, I would not be raising this point at all. But there is no bypass. This is the major thoroughfare in the area, and I do not want to see on-street parking in that area because of traffic flows. My concern is entirely public. It is not to do with Churchill.
And I completely accept, Councillor Barnes, that's the point that you were making. I don't know though, where we can go with this. We have all expressed that concern, and Mr. Thomas has answered, and the officer has answered, and it's in the report as to the positions of the statutory consultees. And we have a suggestion from Councillor Groen.
A possible suggestion is if you guarantee a minimum number of parking spaces for staff, they're the people who are most likely to arrive by car and park on the street. That could be a small condition that satisfies.
We've already agreed as a condition that officers and the applicant will get together and produce a parking management plan. So that's already covered, really. I think. Should we? I will, Councillor Gray, and then I think we do need to move to a vote because time is going on, and I think we've covered the points.
I hate to prolong this, but I just want to point out there are other forms of transport. It is a 7-minute walk to the nearest Tesco's. There is a regular bus service. Please don't let's just prioritise cars beyond all other.
And I think we should move to a vote. We have a proposer and a seconder. And the proposition is that with the additional conditions, that we should approve this application. Those in favour of approval? And I'm told that's unanimous. No? Is there anyone against? Anyone against? Anyone against? We have one abstention from Councillor Stanger. So the votes were 13 in favour and one abstention. Thank you very much, Councillors, and thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you. Agenda item number 8. This is RR 2023-919P, land at Main Road, Westfield Down, Westfield. And we have Mr. Cork will present the matter. I have to say that we have our lawyer, I hope we have our lawyer, Felicity Thomas, who is online to advise us on this matter. Mr. Cork.
Thank you, Chair. This committee presentation relates to agenda items 8 and 9, which comprise a Section 73 application to deliver a 100% affordable housing scheme and a separate but related application to modify the associated Section 106 planning obligation. Members have received an update for the application to modify the planning obligation. In this regard, an amended application form has been submitted with Southern Housing now shown as the applicant. It also shows that East Sussex County Council have been served notice of the application as they were a party to the original planning obligation. Members are also advised that 2 additional comments of support and 1 additional general comment have been received. The 2 applications under consideration relate to an edge of village development of 39 dwellings and associated recreational works, which are nearing completion. The housing scheme was granted planning permission with 24 market dwellings and 15 affordable units as shown in the approved tenure and site plans and secured in the associated Section 106 planning obligation. So the pink houses on the screen are the affordable units in the original planning permission. This equates to an overall balance of some 62% market dwellings and 38% affordable units. The associated recreational works comprise the provision of a senior football pitch, changing room building, recreation lands and an access road, etc. These are also secured in the planning obligation, and this ensures that both the housing development and recreational works proceed in tandem. The obligation includes a provision to not allow occupation of more than 14 of the market dwellings unless the recreational works have been fully completed to the reasonable satisfaction of Rother District Council. Once the recreation works have been completed, Westfield Parish Council are required to accept the transfer of the recreational land. The Section 73 application submitted by Southern Housing seeks to amend the existing planning permission to deliver a 100% affordable housing scheme, with 23 of the dwellings delivered as affordable housing for rent and 16 delivered as shared ownership units. This equates to an overall balance of some 59% affordable housing for rent and 41% shared ownership units. The associated Section 106 planning obligation also needs to be amended to enable the site to deliver 100% affordable housing. As such, an application to modify the planning obligation has been submitted, and the proposed modifications are detailed in a draft deed of variation. With regard to the Section 73 application, the main issues relating to the delivery of 100% affordable housing scheme are whether the provision of 100% affordable housing is acceptable in principle and whether the proposed tenure mix is acceptable. The committee report for the Section 73 application addresses these issues and concludes that given the clear need for more affordable housing in the district, the delivery of a 100% affordable housing scheme in the tenure mix proposed should be supported. As such, the recommendation is to grant variation of the relevant conditions of the planning permission to allow this change to take place. This is subject to modification of the associated Section 106 planning obligation, which is also required to enable the site to deliver 100% affordable housing. In this regard, the separate but related application to modify the obligation sets out the proposed modifications in the draft deed of variation. These would support the delivery of 100% affordable housing and as such are supported in principle. Therefore, the recommendation is to approve modification of the planning obligation subject to completion of the deed of variation. The final version of this will need to be agreed between the relevant parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in accordance with the usual procedure, are there any questions of the officer? Councillor John Barnes.
Quite sure to whom I actually address this question, but maybe the officer could clarify. Was there anything else in the original Section 106 that we're seeking to vary other than the mix of tenure? Did it cover any other aspects?
Yes, there's a change in tenure, but there are also other tweaks to the original planning obligation, and I've set some of those out. They've been set out in the committee report, and are also the draft is appended to the committee report as well, so it sets out in detail what's been proposed.
A little more clarity on what's to happen to those in the proposed agreement.
I can run through the list if you want. So, for example, they're looking to replace existing nominations agreements with a new one.
So I'm looking for the differences as opposed to the identity and similarities.
It is subject to legal agreement. This is something that will be ironed out amongst the parties. It's not for us to actually identify what is different between the deeds or between the legal agreements. We are dealing with the planning issue here, which is the Section 73 application, which is the amendment or to do away with not addressing a condition that has been attached to a planning permission, which then triggers the variation of the already agreed Section 106. So this is a legal matter, and I would let Felicity jump in here and just explain further on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Felicity Thomas, do you wish to comment on what you've just heard?
Yes, I'm not totally clear what the question gets at. The purpose of varying the Section 106 is essentially to facilitate the change from the previous percentage affordable housing to 100%. That is what all the amendments are concerned with. So I'm not entirely sure if I've grasped Councillor Barnes' question properly.
I think one of my concerns, I have others, but we appear to be substituting and we have to take these two applications together, we appear to be substituting Rother's form of nominations for what was in the original Section 106. Well, that's in the further item we're being asked to consider alongside this one.
Can I just say the nominations agreement has always been Rother's nominations agreement, but that agreement is out of date and it needs updating. So hence the proposal for a revised nominations agreement as part of this DOV is just to update the nominations agreement to the current wording that's used.
That's helpful, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions of the officer? Councillor Ganley.
Could you tell me which bodies are signatories to the Section 106 agreement?
We are currently seeking legal advice on that matter.
You don't know who the signatories to the Section 106 agreement are?
Perhaps I can assist on that.
That's astonishing.
Felicity Thomas, please.
I think what we find is that the current Section 106 agreement, the landowner and the council are the signatories, and the parish council is a signatory in terms of their agreement to take on the stewardship of the land after a period of time. So they have been signatory to the original Section 106.
And sorry, and just for clarity, the obligation of the parish council concerns the playing field. That's their part of this. Yes.
But nevertheless, parish council is a signatory to the agreement, to the Section 106 agreement. Is that correct?
The parish council were a signatory to the original Section 106. Yes.
Okay. Then surely their agreement is required in order to modify it.
If the parish council is to remain the future steward of that land, then it is very likely that they may be required to be a signatory. However, that's not a straightforward legal matter because it is arguable whether an original signatory needs to sign a variation if the variation brings no new or further obligation on that original signatory. Now that is legal advice that the council are seeking clarification of.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that Ben Hook wishes to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just sort of addressing the question that Councillor Ganley raised. The answer is yes. The Parish Council, East Sussex County Council, the landowners and Rother District Council are all signatories to the existing Section 106. The original landowner at the point at which it was signed, but that obligation carries on to whoever then purchases that land subsequently. So the obligations on the land, the original land, will then fall to the subsequent landowner. So those were the four original parties involved in the Section 106. In terms of this change, we are seeking definitive legal advice on which of those signatories need to be signatories to any deed of variation. So that is not as yet not definitive. What we have sought legal advice on is whether this committee can make a substantive decision on the planning matters in front of them, regardless of whether we have that information. So knowing whether or not who needs to be a signatory to that remains undefined. It does not affect the ability of this committee to make a decision on the matters of principle in front of you today.
And I see that Felicity Thomas is nodding. Can you confirm that, Felicity? Yes, she nods again.
Yes.
Yes. That is the advice that we have. Councillor Ganley.
Thank you. You've had 2 years in which to do this. Why is it taking so long to get this legal advice? 2 years.
I don't know that that's a proper question. Where does it take us today? We have our advice today. We have the application today. why anything takes so long is something we often scratch our heads over, I think. But here we are. Councillor Gordon, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There seems to be some sort of argument about the legalities of all this. Should we not go for some sort of deferral until that's sorted out, or are we going to sort of discuss this? I mean, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm rather confused because there's a letter, I've got a letter here saying that that there's some sort of legal advice going on, and I'd like to know more about it.
I mean, it is open to councillors to propose deferral if they wish, and that would be voted on. But the advice that we have from our lawyer here today in the room or remotely is that we do not need to defer. We are capable of taking a decision on the matter, which in the first instance is, of course, the housing mix on the site, and secondly, authorisation for the entry in or variation of the 106. But say our advice here today is that this matter has been considered, and that we are advised that we may proceed and consider the issue on its merits. And against that advice, councillors would need to consider what the purpose of deferral would be.
So do I understand the housing list has already opened for this site for occupancy? Can you confirm that? Maybe anybody?
Does anyone know the answer to that? Yeah, we have Graham Quinnell here from the housing department.
No, my understanding is that those properties haven't been advertised for rent as of yet through the Home Move scheme.
Thank you very much for the information. Thank you.
I think, councillors, we have to remember that this is a development which is substantially built out. You can go and see it. It's still got the Harris fencing up. You can't get into it, but you can see it. The buildings are there. Councillor Maynard.
Chairman, I'm not wishing to use my 5 minutes, but simply wish to point out that I was advised by a resident this morning and sent a link to Southern Housing that they had been advertised as of this morning.
I say again, I don't know where that takes us. I don't see that it either helps or hinders us in our deliberations this morning. Councillor John Barnes, and then Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I think I want to understand the legal position, because we are in some danger of blundering into a situation in which we may face judicial review. And given we don't like losing appeals, and we don't like losing judicial reviews because of the cost, I think we have some obligation to the council as a whole to understand the legal position. As I understand it, and there is an interesting parallel here, we can give planning permission over land we don't own. In other words, infeasibility is not a bar to consideration. But we are in danger of going into a situation where we vary a condition, which then turns out to be infeasible. Does that put us in any additional legal problem?
I presume that's addressed to legal. I'm not clear how we are in danger of, perhaps Councillor Barnes could just expand on how that might be so.
What appears to be argued, and I am not a lawyer, which is why I've turned to Felicity for guidance, because this presumably would have to constitute our defence in any potential judicial review, is that at the end of the day, we can unilaterally, as an entity, rather district council, not this planning committee, can unilaterally change a legally binding agreement. This came up at Church Farm Close in Etchingham, which is why I'm quite familiar to the thing. I'm leaving aside all morality in this, I'm simply concerned with legality. If in fact it turns out that we cannot unilaterally change a Section 106, then this change of condition becomes infeasible.
I think Felicity Thomas can answer that.
Okay, so the variation at the moment that is sought is in relation to the percentage of affordable housing on the site. The deed of variation that would have to occur subsequent to an approval for the change in the percentage of affordable housing, that deed of variation, it is hoped, would be able to be agreed amongst the current signatories so that the long-term plan for the parish council to have management and stewardship of the land can remain in place. However, currently it appears that the parish council suggests that they may not be content to be a future signatory to the varied deed of variation that varies the level of affordable housing on the site and the conditions for them taking over management of the land. That's not a clear position that's been stated by the parish council, but it appears to be a possibility. The council would obviously find it terribly disappointing if that were to be the case, but then the council would have to consider what their other options are in the future for management and stewardship of that land in order to make sure that that was secured properly consequent on the approval of the affordable housing variation. So it seems that the parish council currently are saying that they regard this consideration of the matter as potentially irrational if a consequent deed of variation can't be agreed to by the parish council. But that's a matter for the parish council. If they can't agree to being a signatory on a future deed of variation, then the council would have to consider their options, and that is part of the updating legal advice that is being sought. Does that answer the question?
I half answers the question, Chairman, but the problem is if we are still seeking further advice and clarification, can we really properly consider this morning?
Well, I think, Felicity, your advice is that we can consider this here this morning, even though more advice might be needed in the future, that we're not acting irrationally or improperly by proceeding and deciding the substantive issue and authorising the updating of the Section 106 agreement. Those are the issues before us, and you're saying that there is no reason why we shouldn't proceed to do that and for the lawyers to find the appropriate solution, and it's not just a question for lawyers, of course, it's a matter for the parish council and this council as well, that to resolve those matters in the future. But there's no reason why we shouldn't decide the issues before us today, and there's no purpose in deferring. Have I summarised that correctly?
Absolutely, Chair. And the other thing that I think the members need to be aware of is that obviously this application has previously been deferred. We are very hard up against the expiration of time for this determination to be made. And if the matter is further deferred today, we equally run the risk of facing a non-determination appeal by the applicant. So although there may be a risk in that some parties may feel that we could be subject to judicial review proceedings by considering the matter today, we are equally likely to be subject to a non-determination appeal if we don't determine today. So we are somewhat between a rock and a hard place.
Thank you. I know it's some little while ago, but Councillor Gordon was indicating and Councillor Creaser were indicating, and I know I've got Councillor Drayson as well.
Gordon's not going to ask a question. Been answered for me. Thank you.
Your question was a legacy question, and Councillor Creaser?
Councillor Creaser definitely is going to ask a question. Obviously, there were... don't smile at me like that. There are a number of issues here. I mean, as a parish councillor, as well as a district councillor, I have to say that if we were, if the people of Westfield have elected their parish council and they were part and parcel of this originally, and they've obviously got quite strong views about this, it needs to be dealt with. You can't just ignore them. I don't think that's appropriate at all. I couldn't vote for that. Can't just run roughshod over them. They should be part and parcel of this because they are actually the representatives of that community.
I can only say that currently the parish council appears to be suggesting that they are no longer content to agree to the future stewardship of the recreation land.
I would suggest very strongly.
We will be hearing from Councillor Munro from Westfield Parish Council, so no doubt he can speak for himself and enlighten us.
I would suggest very strongly, as I was trying to say, is that we get these guys around the table, PDQ, so they can get on with it. Because I don't suppose anybody really wants to delay this, because regardless of what the tenure is, what the rest of it is, we need to know as a society and of residents and representatives of Brother that this is going forward and not just going around in circles.
I think that Ben Hook may be able to answer that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think we find ourselves in a position. I think Westfield Parish Council have made their position clear. Those meetings, there have been a number of meetings taking place over the last 12 months where that position has been made clear. I think we also, as a planning authority, have received an application from an applicant to vary the tenure mix and subsequent deed of variation for the Section 106. So I think, whilst I completely and totally understand the position of Westfield Parish Council and them representing the views of their community, and Councillor Munro is on the speaker list and he will come forward and present those arguments, I think it's the position of this committee to take on board those arguments, take on board the application and the evidence provided to you by the officer, and the wider considerations in terms of risks, both, as Councillor Barnes has said, in terms of potential judicial review, and on the flip side, a potential appeal for non-determination, in which that decision-making would then be taken out of our hands. So I think one of the things is it's all got to be considered by this committee. I think the legal advice is clear. Is this, as far as this committee stands, you should be able to make this determination today, and there's no reasonable reason, if you like, for deferral. That being said, I think all of the parties are here in the room, able to express their views, and it's the role of this committee to take that balance and come to your own judgment on those matters. So it's you have a paper in front of you from the planning officer. We've had a discussion around the legalities of whether this planning committee should be considering it as of today. Discussions have been had with Westfield Parish Council. I think there is a fundamental difference between the views of the applicant and the views of the Parish Council in this matter as to the tenure mix. And I think Councillor Munro will be able to articulate the local views. It's then a matter for this committee to weigh up those views and come to your own judgment.
Yes, well, we are here. We are charged with the duty of arriving at decisions, and there are time limits on these things too. And I don't think it's a question so much of whether we might be judicially reviewed on the one hand or taken to appeal for non-determination on the other, which is a bit like having two pistols pointed at your head and trying to decide which is the worst of the two. It's not that. We should be trying to reach our own decision on the merits, on the best legal advice that we have from Felicity Thomas. Councillor, I thought you were first. So Councillor Stanger, Ganley, Barnes, and then Drayson. They may be legacy hands by the time we get round to them.
Just a question really on the potential new homes bonus related to this project. How much, if for instance, if it did get deferred non-determination, how much would the council?
A good question. It's in the report. It's in the report.
Well, there's no figure on the. I couldn't see a figure. It just says local. It says new homes bonus grant is payable in the scheme as the outline permission was granted, but it doesn't say a figure. I might be wrong. I might have missed it, but.
No, you're correct. We don't have the figure in the report.
No. But it would be substantial, I think, wouldn't it? Hundreds of thousands? In the hundreds of thousands. And we would lose that. If
That's what I'm saying. Obviously, just to weigh up the balance of both sides.
We would certainly lose the new homes bonus if it went for non-determination. Yes. Thank you. Councillor Ganley.
I'm sorry to belabor the point, but I'm totally mystified. We have a legal agreement between 4 signatories, one of whom wishes to change it without the agreement of the other 3. Or certainly without the agreement of one of them. How can that be? I'm not a lawyer either, but I would have thought that a legal agreement, once signed, is a legal agreement that is binding and cannot be changed without the agreement of all parties concerned.
Well, I'm sure Felicity would confirm this, but Section 106 provides for a means of variation, and there is the question of the interpretation of Section 106 in these particular circumstances as to whether it would require the consent of Westfield. But that's a matter for the future. We don't need to decide that today. I think that's right. Councillor Barnes, John Barnes.
Yes, I think if new homes bonus is payable if we determine, irrespective of which way we determine today. Sorry, just a bit of clarity on that would be useful.
Because of course we're not refusing a planning application because the houses are built. So can officers answer that one?
I had a second question, which was my original question, which is, are we hearing from the applicant? Because I have a question for the applicant.
Yes, we have Tom Tanner from Southern Housing. Yes, we do. Councillor Drayson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I've never heard infeasibility mentioned at one of these meetings before. And on the question of infeasibility, we often grant planning permission to developments that are then not built because they become unfeasible for those people. That doesn't make our original decision flawed just because it couldn't actually be delivered. And surely part of this decision, who signs a subsequent 106 agreement, does not affect our authority or ability to make a decision today.
And Felicity Thomas is nodding. I think perhaps we've exhausted questions. We can have a debate later on, but we do need to hear from. Do we hear from the applicant first? The applicant first. Tom Tanner.
Yeah.
Or do we take the parish first? Tom Tanner. Yes. Is Tom Tanner here, please?
So it's the parish first.
Oh, sorry. I have been corrected. It should be the parish first. Councillor Munro. Please. Councillor Munro, you heard the previous speaker. You know you have to press the button, the red light comes on, and you will have exactly 5 minutes and no more.
Thank you. In all the years I've come into this chamber, since 1987, I have never been threatened before. I'm appalled by the whole thing. This is a very simple application to deal with, and you can deal with it very quickly. It is all about a point of law. That is all it is. It's a point of law. This opinion comes from Buxton solicitors, who are countrywide renowned planning solicitors. They're a totally independent firm, and they have also sought legal counsel from Landmark Chambers, and I think quite a lot of you may well have heard of Landmark Chambers in London. I quote from the Buxton's letter, which you will have had this morning. There may be nothing unlawful about applications being considered by the Planning Committee, but members should be under no illusion that they should not grant what is sought. They must refuse or adjourn. To grant would be subject to challenge if only for the simple reason the Section 73 application cannot be implemented, therefore it would be irrational to grant it. The advice of the committee in the officer's report in relation to the deed of variation and signature is plainly wrong. Westfield Parish Council are signatories to the 106, and without our signature it would be an unlawful decision to grant planning consent for these applications. I should remind you that both applications must be heard together to avoid predetermination and for the reason already stated through Buxton's. Granting these applications would leave Rother open to legal action from the Parish Council, as you've heard. We've already resolved to take that if we have to. Further, we have the funds and the willpower to do so. Does the Planning Committee wish to commit Rother to unnecessary expense? Debate, not hate. The right engagement matters. Sit at the bottom of your emails, your strapline. We have had no debate, and we've had no engagement at all. Minimal number of meetings, all at our instigation. It would seem sensible to defer for time to consider Rother's legal advice when it arrives. You have not had legal advice on this point of law. How can you possibly make a decision? You can't. It's absolutely ridiculous. We had less than 2 hours to consider, and the officers' councillors, let alone the parish council, to consider Kemi's email, which is not a legal answer. It's not the legal advice you need over the 106, etc. I feel absolutely certain, in my experience in the past with Rother, that if the situation was reversed, Rother would say exactly the same. We have to defer for time to consult and show some transparency. So the request is defer hearing these applications to the next planning committee. Is it a totally unreasonable request? In the history of this site, the strength and unity of feelings in Westfield and the legal advice you've received from Buxton's. If there was a genuine sense of urgency over this development, then Optivo Southern Housing, who knew what they were buying in April 21, 2 years ago, they would have applied at the time of purchase. Or, when the original legal advice came out in November 21, why did they not apply then? Because they thought they were going to get away with it. Even when they agreed with Buxton's opinion about having to put 2 applications in May 2022, they still didn't apply. So you cannot be blackmailed by them over urgency and delay. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. The Parish Council has endeavoured to engage with Rother. We have been ignored. We've requested mediation, and that was refused. We're not consulted even when promised. Hardly transparency at its best. The right engagement matters, your strapline. We have suggested a compromise, and we've heard nothing back. There has been no real discussion with Rother. The Parish Council feels very strongly, in case you hadn't noticed, that it should not be necessary for one public body to be fighting another. It is ridiculous that Rother officers still seem intent on creating an us and them environment. It's hostile, hardly compatible with your right engagement matters on your emails.
30 seconds.
We don't wish to go on spending public money in order to make Rother follow the correct legal process, so could we please defer these applications? I'm not going to reiterate what Buxton's has said. It is outrageous. We have had no joy engaging with Rother officers. You have been let down by them. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to both our district councillors for their support. Carl has been continuously involved over many years, and we are very grateful for all he's done. I find it very telling that Beverley Cooper, as a fresh pair of eyes, has been so positive and supportive of the Parish Council. Thank you both. And as you know, you can't possibly discuss this in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, and we shan't. If you remain there, I'm sure that councillors will wish to ask you questions and bring out some further points, if any. Councillor Groner.
Thank you. At the beginning of your monologue, you mentioned that you were threatened.
Yes,
Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, I felt that the advice your solicitor... Sorry. Am I supposed to press 2 buttons? You get me twice? That's one. One of me is more than enough. Yes, I definitely felt threatened that the attitude your solicitor, barrister, whatever she is taking is, well, Parish Council, if you don't agree with what we want, you won't get the fields and things. We have repeatedly, I cannot tell you how long this has gone on for, we have repeatedly said, we really want to take over the playing field, we really want the recreation area sorted, but it has to be done to a suitable standard. As Erin Cork pointed out, there is a standard.
Thank you. I think you've answered the question. I don't completely understand it, but you have answered the question that you felt threatened by lawyers with legal matters.
Well, yes, we are, because it's never been questioned whether we wanted to take it over. We are really keen. We want the whole thing resolved and settled, but it has to be done by a proper legal process. And the way it's been going through, rather up till now, it has not been the proper legal process.
And you definitely want the playing field and the...
Yes, absolutely. It has been plain as day since 2005, when we first approached Rother to get it in the local plan. It has been there uppermost in our wish list. So it cannot be questioned.
Thank you. Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, thank you. I've just got one question as a sort of new member of the planning team. I just want to understand your issue around the 100% affordable housing and why you're so against having this particular development as 100% housing, 100% affordable on rent, when we've got such a high number of families right across Rother, Bexhill, rural areas who need housing. So could you sort of enlighten me on that, please?
Yes, very happily. I believe the majority of people on the housing register are from Bexhill. The need is Bexhill-centric. To take people from Bexhill and put them in a rural area it's very boomy, doesn't work very well. Our main issue is that this is done legally. It's taken nearly 20 years to get to this point. We are very happy. We really wanted 40% affordable. It gives the mix. It allows people in the village to rent. It allows shared ownership. That's another discussion as to the viability of it. And open market. That's what's in your local plan. That's what's in the DASA. That is policy, I think it's VL11, but I'll be corrected on that. It's all there. It's what everybody expected. To find that the land has been sold, back-to-back deals been done behind everybody's back, and suddenly it's 100% affordable, that is what we object to. The legal process hasn't been done properly. We've got nothing against affordability. We are actually very pro it. But you have to have a mix. A mix is what works. Government guidelines, Rother's planning policy. Everybody knows it needs to be a proper mix. And that's all we're after. We don't like being stitched up.
Thank you. I just wonder whether perhaps Mr. Cork could just tell us about the allocations policy, whether this is Bexhill-centric, I think was said.
I think Graham Cornell, the housing officer, was best placed to deal with that question.
Even better.
But just before we go ahead with that, we do have a technical advice note which is talked about in the committee report, which says that we should be supporting 100% affordable housing sites and principles. So it's in the committee report. It was published in January 2023 of this year.
Correct me if I'm wrong, a technical note is not planning policy. It's not part of your planning policy.
Can we hear from Graham Cornell, please?
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to touch on the question of need, of housing need across the district and specifically to Westfield. So at the time of the report, there were 73 households with a local connection to Westfield on the council's housing register. So those are households who could potentially be interested in the rented element of this scheme, which currently stands at 23 units, I believe, in the scheme put forward. I ran the numbers again first thing this morning. That's grown to 78. And of the nearly 530 applications waiting to be processed on our housing register, there's an additional 5 with a local connection to Westfield in there as well. We currently have over 2,000 on the housing register in total, 2,041. 150 households in temporary accommodation. The need for affordable rented housing is absolutely key. And we're seeing local authorities not too far away being crushed under the weight of their temporary accommodation bills and needs. I would leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That is fine, and I absolutely understand the need for housing. However, I think you'll find that historically, if you go back the last time we were able to check it, which is very recently, the housing need for Westfield in A and B category matches the houses that would be available on the down. The other houses on the down are not suitable. However, regardless of the housing need, and we are very aware of it and support of it, but that's by the by, you're ignoring the elephant in the room, the illegality of what you're proposing doing. It is unlawful. You haven't had legal advice. And in the officer's report, he said, oh, well, if the legal advice comes through that we have to entertain Westfield.
No, please. I need to stop you there. We have had legal advice, and the legal advice is that we can determine this matter today, and determine it on the merits, and the merits we've heard eloquently, I think, from both Mr. Cork and Mr. Quinnell. And in response to the matters raised by Councillor Bayliss there is a need for housing of this nature, and we need to consider the policy, and the policy is there in the housing note.
Need to have a consistent planning policy.
No. Councillor Maynard would like to ask a question of the Speaker. No, he doesn't. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. On the interests of balance, you said that 40% affordable is acceptable, and that 100% affordable is the wrong mix, an undesirable mix. Can you given that I'm sure the underlying reasoning behind your legal challenge is not to protect the law of England and to straighten out wrinkles in the law books, you essentially are saying we're okay with 40%, we don't want 100%. Perhaps you can just expand on that reasoning for us as to what's wrong with 100% affordable.
Part of our reasoning is to actually make Rother stick to the law and behave properly and do the planning properly, because otherwise the whole planning system falls into disrepute. Well, it does in the district if things just get ruined willy-nilly. On the question of 40% versus 100, 40% is the national average or whatever. It's what people have. So obviously we start from that point. 40% seems to be accepted as what takes that fills up the demand for people's children, etc., etc. And it's a viability issue. We are very keen, absolutely no question, we are very keen to have rented and shared ownership if there's a viable scheme. We need that in the village. We want a mix. We have not campaigned for 100% open market, but it needs to be a mix. You go through Rother's planning guidance, government guidance, you pepper pot affordable in, it brings everybody up. You don't run the risk of creating a ghetto or whatever. It's your policy. It's your policy, and you're going against it.
So we're bringing everybody up to where?
I don't know. Yeah,
it's not. It's actually not relevant. We want a proper mix.
We want it so it's going to work.
Councillor Munro, thank you. I think you've answered that. I would, for the benefit of members, and I know that we have some new members here, I think perhaps Graham Quinnell could explain what is meant by affordable housing in this context, and the mix and the policy, please.
Point of order, Chairman. Just before you do, can we actually condemn the word ghetto that was just used? Thank you.
Thank you. And I missed it, and I would have condemned it too had I heard it. Mr. Quinnell.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, 39 units. I believe 16 for shared ownership, 23 for affordable rent. So both are types of affordable housing approved under the NPPF. The affordable rent in this instance will be rented at or below local housing allowance rates, which are very low. So for a two-bedroom property, that's some £650. For a three-bedroom property, some £850. On that point, you might want to try and look at the ability of renting a two-bedroom property in Westfield or anywhere else for £650, let alone a three-bed for £850. Having cast the net quite wide over the last couple of days looking at this, it's nigh on impossible, if not actually impossible. So these are below market rent properties for households on our housing register. Households are, so the 23 units, rented units for households on our housing register, who are allocated one of four priority bands from A through to D. Band A being your homeless households, households in temporary accommodation, those with severe medical needs, down to those who are perhaps in overcrowded accommodation, and that sort of thing. They will express an interest in one of those 23 properties that they're eligible to express an interest on and be allocated in line with our allocations policy, which looks at the highest band that you're in, your local connection to the district as a whole and to one of the clusters of parishes in that district, and how long you've been on the register. In the case of the 23 rented units here at Westfield Down, it is proposed to enter into a local lettings plan. I think there's note of that in the deed of variation, reference is made to it, so that the initial lets on this scheme will be prioritised really only to those with a local connection to Westfield. This is an unusual stipulation. It's not something that we always do, but it is something which has become more common with wholly affordable housing schemes. You may recall that we did similar in Ticehurst recently as well. So it's something that we will do, and actually I welcome it on this occasion, with the exception of one unit which is adapted for a full-time wheelchair user bungalow, which, given the type of unit, we feel really must be allocated on the basis of need rather than local connection. So those are your rented units. I don't propose to go into more detail on those. Then we have the shared ownership units, which people will be able to purchase their varying chunks of. They pay a rent on the remainder and are able to staircase to full ownership, to become full market owners in the fullness of time, if that is their desire and their means to do so. Perhaps Tom Tanner can confirm, but I believe that these properties were marketed to local people, the shared ownership properties, ahead of their full marketing. That was certainly my intention. So the local people who wanted to move on to the scheme are able to express their interest in doing so and start that in motion. And from some of the public comments that I've read from people that are waiting to move into these properties as shared ownership purchasers, and desperate to do so, to get out of living with mum and dad, out of a very expensive private rental situation, they want to see this matter resolved as soon as possible and the development come through to completion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I recall some years ago now, the figure will be out of date, I think I was told that in order to be able to have a shared ownership house, similar to this, you would need an income in excess of £30,000 a year or so.
Yes, you'll need to be on or around the median income for the district in order to access one of these properties, certainly.
Thank you. I think we've probably exhausted questions of the Speaker. No, we've not. Councillor Barnes, it's a question of the Speaker.
Sorry, I wasn't clear where we were going because we seem to be blurring questions to the Speaker and questions to officers. I do have some questions for our housing people, but I have one question for the Speaker, through you, Chairman. Is there evidence that there are people with connections to Westfield who would buy on the open market rather than shared ownership?
And the answer to that is?
As far as I'm aware, there is a lot of interest for all from the village. For open market, definitely there's interest. There's definite interest in shared ownership, except the current shared ownership scheme is very expensive and you have to have a high income, etc. And there's definite interest in rental. So the mix, as proposed, would actually satisfy the need in the demand in Westfield.
Well, thank you, Councillor Munro. You were just waving. Thank you, Councillor Munro. If you would go back to your seat, please. Thank you. Yes. Oh, yes, of course. And Tom Tanner, I'm sorry to have kept you so long. Please come forward. And yes, and we're about to start the clock, and he will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, for giving me the chance to speak. Now, I was going to say a lot about the need for affordable housing locally. After hearing the debate this morning, I didn't fully appreciate how strongly Parish felt about the signatory point, and I think that actually it would be good to discuss that further, and I'm very grateful for the Parish for putting their point across this morning, and also just from hearing from others. And I think it would be in the committee's interest to defer this today for further consideration in light of the legal advice received as well. But if anyone wants to ask me questions, then please do.
Tell us who you are, Tom.
Yeah, I'm Tom Tanner, Planning Manager.
Councillor Drayson.
Thank you. With that suggestion, does that mean you're undertaking not to pursue any question of non-determination if we were to defer it today?
I don't think it would be in our interest to pursue an appeal for non-determination, and we would like it resolved as to the Parish Council.
And Ben Hook is going to ask a question.
Sorry, to break with the norm, can I just confirm with Southern then that you will be granting the necessary extensions of time to our planning officers in order to bring this back to a committee at a future date, which, given the likelihood of, given the arrangements as of now, is likely to be no earlier than October?
Yes, no, I can agree to that, yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bayliss.
Can Tom, can you confirm that we will be going ahead and renting those properties that are currently allocated for rent? I mean, I don't want to hold people up who are living in awful temporary accommodation from moving into some what look like good properties to me.
Apologies, do you mean the units that are already secured for the existing Section 106 agreement? Yes, we would look to do that because we're entitled to do that. And the people are in need, that's the other point.
Well, that's a slightly unexpected turn of events, isn't it? Yes, I'm pondering. Councillor Ganley first.
I'd just like to congratulate the Speaker on the position that you have taken. Well done.
And Councillor Barnes, I'll just hear what you say.
Yes, Maybe I could defer this to October, but since Mr. Tanner is here, sorry, have I got the surname right? Yep. I'm quite interested to explore why Southern, unlike other register providers, does not actually envisage any market housing on their sites, given our policy LHN 1/5.
We do. I mean, we will look to take Section 106 units from other developers, but we also develop ourselves. So we will deliver 100% affordable housing where there's an identified need. And in this case, Westfield has an identified need. It doesn't see a great deal of development. So a scheme like this, 39 units, which compared with some schemes is not that large, is going to meet local need. And that has to be taken into account. Plus, we're locally based. That's the thing. We have a big presence in Rother and the local area, and in surrounding parts of Sussex and Kent as well.
Can I just absolutely clarify the reason for the deferment? What will happen between now and the next time this comes before the committee?
I have attended meetings with the parish council, but I think it'd be in everyone's interest if we had another meeting to discuss. We also sought our own legal advice and brought a suitable way forward.
Thank you. Councillor Maynard would like to ask something.
Red to speak. You can hear me, can you? Right, fantastic. No, I just wanted to give a little bit of context, and Councillor Munro has already explained about, obviously, the legal arguments as have Felicity and indeed the representative from Buxton's representing the parish council. But this is distinctly different from a planning application that's coming to you as a new planning application for 100% affordable. And it's really, really, really interesting to make that point, because you have to go back to 2006 when it was the parish council that approached Rother. I can remember walking around various sites in Westfield with David Marlowe, who was then obviously strategic lead, looking at various sites, and it was the parish council that put this site forward. Without the request from the parish council, this site would never have come forward in the first place. And the reason the parish council put it forward was to get a new football pitch and other recreational facilities, and the housing was there as part of that. And that's why that original Up 106 and the spirit of that original 106 are so important. It's so important because that is intrinsic in the existing local plan. That is what the parish council negotiated with Rother back then. That is what, and this is the most important thing, that is what went out to local residents, indeed the residents of Rother, in terms of this is what is going to happen when it goes into the local plan. What is in front of you today completely contravenes that local plan. There are parish chairmen on this committee who, if I'm sure, are in similar situations where it is a flagship policy or a plan, if you like, of a parish council, that it goes forward exactly as it says on the tin, exactly as it's been consulted upon. That is why there is a significant strength of feeling in Westfield. That is why there is a significant strength of feeling within the parish council, because what was originally proposed had been widely consulted upon and had support within the village. And quite frankly, the way that things have happened since, and I welcome the comments made by Mr. Tanner today, because we've had a woeful lack of conversation between Rother officers, Southern Housing and the parish council. A woeful lack. And the back-to-back sale, when it all kicked off, is intrinsic in how that has carried through, because it has certainly been a then and us. And I make no apologies for the strength of my emails, because of the simple fact that there hasn't been that engagement with the parish council. There hasn't been that engagement, thus thereby, with local residents. And that is why it is not simply about whether it's 100% or whether it is a mix. It is about the fact that what is in the original 106 was widely consulted upon, has the support of the people of Westfield. I can tell you all now, the reputation of Rother District Council in Westfield is in the mud as a direct result of this process.
Thank you. Now, I think that I will, in a moment, be inviting a proposer and a seconder for deferral. Moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Ganley. I'm aware that we haven't heard from Ward Member Councillor Beverly Cooper. She is there online. Do you wish to say anything, Councillor Cooper?
I think most of what I was going to say is probably now irrelevant, but just echoing on from what Mr. Tanner said, there's a strong emphasis on what I was going to say around meeting, sitting around the table with Southern, some more negotiation. Obviously, Mr. Tanner's just echoed that, so I welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Tanner, if you would then perhaps go back to your usual seat. We have a proposer and a seconder for deferment, but I think, would you want to speak now?
Yeah, I just want to clarify next steps for the members of the committee. So in terms of next steps, obviously the development will continue under the existing Section 106. Just to clarify that under that, the terms of that, Southern will be able to occupy those houses that are listed under the existing affordable tenures under the existing Section 106. So as officers, we will continue to operate on the basis that the existing Section 106 stands, and those conditions will continue to be met. Obviously, subject to the will of both parties, in terms of Westfield Parish Council and Southern seek to convene meetings to discuss possible other tenure mixes that can be agreed between the two parties, to then as to whether or not there's any requirement for change coming back in this application or a further application that might need to come in as part of that process. So just to sort of clarify, in the case of the deferral and the agreement with the parties, we will continue under the existing Section 106 and continue to discharge all of those conditions and matters. Occupation will take place, but only in accordance with the existing Section 106 requirements, and then further negotiations to happen in terms of a future possible tenure mix. Thank you, Chairman.
I see that Councillor Proshak has appeared on screen with a hand up. Councillor Proshak.
Chair, are you into debate now?
We have a motion, a proposer and a seconder for deferral.
If I may, with your permission, I would like to make a comment. Somebody else has got their microphone on, I think. The comment is that actually I felt so uncomfortable listening to Hamish Munro, and I've known him for a very long time, spraying around all the accusations against Rother. We're not breaking the law, we're not going against policy, and it is such a pity in a way because of Westfield's attitude to 100% affordable. And when I say Westfield, I mean particularly the chairman. Because of that attitude, it has held things up enormously, and we know that there's been a lot of feeling against 100% affordable. And we had a very, very good briefing fairly recently from which we got the technical guide to say 100% affordable in the terms of the description from Southern, which was shared ownership, etc., was perfectly acceptable within policy. So I felt uncomfortable without officers having to defend themselves, being able to defend themselves. Just a by the way, my daughter, when she's a teacher and she got a shared ownership many years ago and now owns her own house. It's a way of getting on the housing ladder, definitely. And I just would like to say, of all the phone calls I get, and I'm sure I share this with other councillors, the one of homelessness or the one of wanting a home is probably the most difficult, because we just say, no, we can't do anything about it. We don't have enough homes. I would love to have a big, affordable 100% in Robertsbridge. If you don't want it in Westfield, Robertsbridge will have it, because it's a gift. It's an absolute gift. And I think it's because the government is supporting that with the home and the homes, with the registered landlords. They're supporting that, and that's the reason we can do it. And time after time after time, we actually say no to affordable because of viability problems. Thank you for affording me that time.
Thank you, Councillor Proshak. Thank you very much. We have a proposer and a seconder for deferral. I was going to say that peace had broken out, but maybe not. So, those in favour of deferral, please raise your hands. And I'm told that is unanimous. So, that we were dealing with the first of the two applications. I think we should vote on the second one also. That was on the first. So the next item is RR 2022-2935/P. We have a proposer for deferral. Proposed by Councillor Gandy, seconded by Councillor Drayson. Those in favour of deferral? Those against? That is unanimous again. Councillor Drayson.
I'd just like to wish all the parties all the best, because this has got to be resolved. And good luck to them.
Yeah. Yes, and I think we will adjourn for 10 minutes. Councillors, we are resuming the Planning Committee meeting. We are resuming at about 4 minutes past 12. Agenda item number 10, Acorn Farms Shrub Lane, RR 2022-2959P. And the officer presenting is Sarah Shepherd.
Good morning, councillors. Right. The next item is, as you notice, Acorn Farm. You will have noticed from the report in the agenda that this was an item deferred from the meeting back in March. At that time, members were minded to consider approval of the proposal subject to resolution of the highway objection. Since March, the applicant has undertaken traffic surveys, and that was in specific relation to the access, which you can see on the screen here. There are hedges both sides of the access. There was concerns about visibility and issues about speed and things like that. As I say, the applicant has undertaken the necessary traffic surveys. That information has been sent back to the Highways Authority. We've reconsulted them, and as you will note from the report, the Highway Authority have now withdrawn their objection. They're happy that sufficient visibility is available. They are now no objections subject to conditions regarding parking and visibility displays. There was also an issue comment in the minutes before about the glazing and potential for light pollution. Conditions are recommended for those now. So going on your previous comments, the report attached is still the original officer's report, because that's what the agenda is. It's made up of the reports of the director, not the reports from committee. But you have got the minutes there before you. You've got the removal of highway objection, concerns about sighting. The applicant's also written in about those and advised that it's not possible to put it further closer to the existing barns and things over in this southwestern area away from the site where the other house is, because of the overhead lines, substation, things of that nature, and access to the fields. So, knowing that members are minded to approve, we have got a draft of conditions. They would include the standard time implementation, approved plans, Because this is for an agricultural worker, there would be a condition tying the property for an agricultural occupation. Details required for drainage. Details required on the landscaping. You will recall that there was concern about the openness of this site, and the proposal does include landscaping to the boundaries to help mitigate views of the building within the landscape. Provision of parking is included on the site. There's a condition for that, for the cycle parking to be undertaken, visibility space to be provided, no lighting unless the scheme is first submitted and approved, and then it must comply with the environmental zones and the lighting levels within that. Details for materials, and those details to also include the potential for the use of electromagnetic glass or similar, particularly within the large glazed areas that you can see here to the rear and the southern side elevations. As I say, planting, water efficiency, that's a standard condition that goes on as well, and the building in compliance with Part M42 of the building regulations, and a maintenance period for new planting to ensure that that does take on the site. That's my update, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm aware that some councillors here were not on the site visit because it was the previous committee. We have new councillors, but the rest of us saw the site. Are there questions of the officer? I think you were first, Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, sorry. I mean, I've read through the report. I would like to propose that we approve the application.
So you move acceptance, and Councillor Gordon seconds it.
Chairman, yeah, I've seen the site and we've discussed it. I know it's a previous committee, but it's obviously a genuine farming, working farm site. It's not somebody trying to pull a fast one. It's genuine.
Councillor Barnes wishes to speak.
Yes, I'm totally in favour of this. I think both ward members and the parish council have always been supportive of this particular family. This is a livestock farm, and they have to be long periods on the site, particularly at breeding season. So this is absolutely essential. What I would want to make sure, and I'm sure it is in the landscaping condition, is that we use the right sort of species for that area of the AONB. I happen to think the location makes less intrusion on the AONB than adding to the farm buildings further away. But technically, even if we moved it in that direction, it would not be feasible because of the pylons on the site. So I think it's in the right place, but I agree that it needs to be landscaped, but landscaped to suit the AONB. I'm glad that Dark Skies are also being recognised, but I think the applicant was perfectly happy about that. I'm happy to support like everybody else.
Thank you. I'm sure officers will take that on board when working things up. I see that we have the other ward member, Councillor Kirby Green, is available remotely. I don't know if you wish to come in there, Councillor Kirby Green.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm actually yes, I'm mobile at the moment. I have sent an email to everyone. I just echo Sarah's or the officer's remarks. You know, there's strong support for this, and I think they've satisfied all the concerns that were raised at the last meeting. So I just support approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else before we move to a vote? No? No? You sure? No? In that case, all those in favour of granting permission? That is unanimously in favour. So that is passed. Thank you, councillors. Agenda item number 11, RR 2023 1344 DN, and this is at Bexhill, the Old King Offa High School. Proposal for demolition and being presented by Mr. Worsley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This prior notification application is reported to the Planning Committee due to Rother District Council being the applicant and landowner. The notification is for demolition of a former kitchen and dining room building at the King Offa site in Bexhill, pending the redevelopment of the site with new dwellings and a leisure centre. Demolition of a building can be permitted development subject to the prior approval process to consider the method of demolition and restoration of the site. In this case, we have those details which has been prepared by a contractor. The information provided is thorough and complete. The recommendation is that we don't require prior approval for demolition details or restoration of the site. Got some aerial photography on the screen. Which shows the building. So this, where the cursor is, that's the building in question. So it's set behind the school building. I think a tree works application came before you a month or two ago, which we granted. That's the tree in question, where the cursor is. Next slide is aerial photography taken from the north, looking south, which gives a better shot of the building in question, with the tree behind. Like I say, lots of information is provided. Officers do not think we need any more. Thank you.
Councillor Drayson has a question.
No.
You had your hand up.
Yes, I was going to move acceptance, although I was not going to get tied up with the double negatives that might stray into it. So I was going to move approval of the recommendation.
So, approval of the recommendation proposed by Councillor Drayson, seconded by Councillor Ganley. Those in favour? Unanimous? And that is unanimous, thank you. That is unanimous. We come on to agenda item number 12. Thank you, councillors. Agenda item number 12, which are the appeals. Kemi, are you dealing with this?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman, members. This item 12 is just to report the appeals that we've got currently with the council. So we've got those that are lodged, and then we've got going down, we've got those that, We've got those that are currently lodged against us, against the decision, so this will be delegated and committee overturns. And then we've also got the list of those that have started. These are the ones that PINS have actually given us a starting date and given us a timeline to when we expect statements well, not necessarily a possible decision, but they've got an inspector allocated to it and dates that statements need to be in by both parties. And we've got those that have started. We've exchanged statements, but we're just waiting for the inspector to make their decisions on that. And finally, we've got those that have been allowed and those that have been dismissed. This hasn't changed from the last time we reported it, which was last planning committee. still the same, but we have had a couple in the last few days that have come through, which will probably go on the next one, depending on what you agree in terms of going forward in how we report this. I have a proposition to the chairman and the deputy chair in terms of how we report this going forward, whether or not it would be better and more informative to have decisions that have come through and summarize those ones and what inspectors have made or concluded in terms of allowing them. And that could go as a way of lessons learned for us and how we learn in terms of how we make decisions going forward. And that can be reported quarterly alongside with the numbers of appeals we've got and those that are pending, etc. We can put those into figures and into graphs if that is more preferred for members in that sense. So it's just a question whether or not it would be a better way to report this, because just showing you numbers and sort of list of applications or appeal, it really doesn't give much information other than it takes up pages, really. So it's just what you would prefer, really. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Dreesen and then Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, Chair. I know I personally don't use this much other than the meeting because we get emails of the appeal results anyway. So I'm just thinking, rather than making the public sit through our deliberations, is it sensible to close the meeting and have a discussion after?
Just what I was about to say. Just what I was about to say. Yes.
I would want to make an on-the-record point because I am concerned about the decision that came through on Burwash RR 2022 stroke 1337p on page 104. Not only did the inspector find against us, but actually he was critical and therefore awarded costs against us. My unease is that this is the second appeal on this site, and the two are not on all fours. The first inspector found for us, the second inspector found against us on what is an identical planning application. I don't know if there's anything we can do to draw the attention of that kind of inconsistency to the planning inspectorate, because it doesn't seem to me desirable in terms of consistency of decision making that two inspectors can reach radically different conclusions on the site. I do have another concern, which is we apparently actually were given duff information because an officer had not visited the site. I don't think it would have affected the recommendation or the appeal, but I have to say there is a lesson there to be learned. But it's more how we take up the inspectorate, the apparent inconsistency of their own inspectors implying judgment.
I presume that the second inspector was aware of the first appeal. Kenny, do you want to answer that?
Thank you, Chairman. Usually when you have an appeal decision, yes, inspectors are aware of what their predecessor has already made or discussed on that site, and they will weigh the differences, what is different now and what has happened since that previous appeal decision. Maybe NPPF, maybe the policies have changed, maybe national guidances have changed. They will weigh that and also discount or within their decision state why they are taking a contrary view to their predecessors. It does, with inspectors, yes, sometimes they do uphold what their predecessors have said and sometimes they do change their mind. That is, well, given the circumstances or the merit of the cases before them and what they've seen differently to the time the last decision was made. However, we also can review the decision and decide if we want to challenge it. We have to weigh the cost of challenging. We have to weigh whether or not we're likely to get a different outcome and what that serves itself. And we do review this amongst us. I do review the appeal decisions with my team leaders and in our meeting, our service meetings, we do discuss the decisions coming through and how we're viewing them and what we're learning from them, and what we do decide to take forward. We discuss with legal whether we have any merit of taking the inspector on to jail or on their decision.
I probably don't think this one is important enough to challenge, but feedback, I think, is imperative here. He doesn't seem to have explained why he differed from the previous inspection decision. He doesn't really, I think, he says this is a matter of subjective judgment. If this is simply a matter of subjective judgment, why on earth should he substitute his own for the local opinion? So I think we do need to feed back on this, even if we don't challenge, that really an inspector who differs from a previous judgment, and there has been no change in circumstances, really should explain why. Because otherwise the people in Bowash Weald have no idea why, in fact, our decision was overturned and the previous appeal decision overturned. And they are, not unnaturally, somewhat concerned at the arbitrary nature of this appeal.
Yes, and it does seem rather hard to see how the council could be said to be acting unreasonably, so that costs were awarded in those circumstances too. I think I did glance at the decision, and I think the housing supply probably came into it somewhere. But yes, generally speaking, perhaps I shouldn't say it, but the standard of decision making by the inspectorate in these smaller cases is usually very good. They usually read very well, and I think perhaps when there is something out of line like that, it would be useful to have a dialogue with the inspectorate, if that can be done. Yes. Anybody else? Councillor Ganley.
A couple of things, Chairman. First of all, I'd just like to agree with the development manager's proposal on how the appeals are submitted to us. I think it's a very good idea. I also agree with, actually it wasn't your suggestion, it was, anyway, you agreed with the second suggestion. I've forgotten what it was, but I agree with it anyway.
I think the proposal was to close the meeting so we could discuss the future way in which this is presented, just in a less formal way.
Indeed so.
And so I think I'll do that. I will close, while I'm ahead of the game, I shall close the meeting.
Well, I want to ask a question about a recent...
Meeting is closed.
Okay, well, good. Meeting is closed. Then may I ask about...
well, if the meeting's closed, I'll